Welcome to the podcast for Cody Top Totality.
Cody Top Totality.
Yep, that's the podcast. No, I'm Cody, and this is Tabletop Totality. Welcome aboard, Bone Ponies. What do we have? Who do we have here with me today?
We have Steven.
Ooh, Steven. Neil is also here.
And Frank's visiting.
He's
From out of town.
Yeah, he's out of town visiting.
Cool.
Yeah.
So, we are thinking about discussing Warlocks. for Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition.
Yes.
Nice.
Does anybody here have experience with a Warlock? I've played a Warlock.
I've played a Warlock.
I've only been in parties where people are playing Warlocks.
I watched a Warlock play once.
Nice.
Maybe twice.
Maybe 3 times.
No, it was one time.
Oh, okay.
I DM'd a Warlock.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. So, like, Cody, what was like the big driving factor for you to want to play a Warlock?
Wait, before we even do that, shouldn't we explain what a Warlock is for those who don't know?
I guess, you are a sound of reason here, Frank, and I'll give you that one.
Educate the masses.
So a Warlock is a class, and what they do is they find a patron, and that's where they get all their magical powers from. And then they use that magical power to cast spells and to use invocations and things of that nature. Their connection to their patron is where all their power is. Did I about sum that up correctly? Or
Pretty much, yeah. Patron is just like a very powerful magical creature, like some sort of like archfey or like elder god or something like that. Some kind of thing that isn't quite a god, but is more powerful than your standard being.
so
What
not
if it
Owl
was-
Bear.
What if it was like a god that lost power? Could that be a patron?
Yeah, that could be it.
Yeah, I mean, that would just depend on, I think, really just your DM discretion,
Ooh.
So a powerful monster, like let's say like an aboleth could be one, or a dragon.
A Kraken could be a patron,
Oh wow. Okay, so it's not limited to certain
Right.
things. It can,
Yeah, like a really ancient dragon could be a patron.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent.
Yeah.
All right, so Neil, your question for Cody, what was that again?
Yeah, just kind of, out of all the classes, what made you want to play that Warlock? What was the driving factor there?
So I'm working my way through the classes in 5th edition. I haven't played all of them.
Mm-hmm.
I have favorites from my years of playing Dungeons and Dragons.
As we all do.
Like my 3.0 or my 3.5 Bard, who he was amazing.
Mm-hmm.
The Swiss Army knife of classes.
Yeah.
It's a valid.
But for 5th edition, the Warlock was kind of appealing to me, probably because of more or less my interests in like science fiction and fantasy. I'm very big into Robert E. Howard, who did the Conan the Barbarian, H.P. Lovecraft, things like that.
Gotta get my Lovecraft in.
Yeah, so I kind of enjoy the idea of this, this like otherworldly connection, giving power to somebody. And the Warlock is a caster class, but it's not as defined, I would say, magically by, like not like a sorcerer, like a wizard, like you're like just full casters.
Mm-hmm.
Warlock has a limited number of spells that they know. They have a limited number of spell slots, but they get lots of cool little add-on abilities that really, I thought would provide a lot of flavor. So when I was asked to play in a campaign, it was a pre-made setting for Waterdeep. It was the Dragon Heist campaign. I wanted to play some sort of like a gumshoe, like a detective. So I worked for the City Watch, and I was in the City Watch for Waterdeep, but I was dealing with this newly found powers because we started at level 1. So I was dealing with newly found powers granted to me by a patron that I didn't really understand what their wants or desires were, and that was was cool. I thought it was a cool dynamic. But yeah, I think just maybe the idea of that relationship in role playing, like that kind of plot line, was appealing to me just because of what I'm a fan of in literature and things like that, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, I mean I feel like that speaks a lot about how you play your characters. You know what I mean? You're more of that RP type person. I feel like that was like a huge point that the Warlock allows in a way.
Yeah, and I feel like any of like the different subclasses for Warlock, I think you can get a completely different feel. And then depending on like what your patron is, so in the game they have like you could have like an archfey, you could have an other god, like an outsider god, which would be more like your Cthulhu, your Yog-Shoggoth, things like that.
Yeah.
And then you could have a fiendish pact, with either something from the abyss or the hells or whatever. They also included the Hexblade Warlock, which I think was very cool. It kind of allowed you to be more of a martial character. I wouldn't say you'd be more of like a frontliner, but you could trade some damage. Your packed weapon would continue to get powerful. You'd be able to summon a weapon tied to your patron from like a pocket dimension.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, which is pretty cool. And that's what I played for my character was a Hexblade, because I kind of thought I enjoy combat in D&D, but I wasn't looking to I guess it wasn't looking to like maximize his stats or anything. I just kind of liked the story that I came up with for the character.
Yeah.
I was trying to do like a plot line where there's going to be like a lot of temptation. So like he was an officer of the law. He was also formerly a criminal. But he was trying to like, he always kind of walked that line. So like he would like he'd help out in like a bad situation, but he would also like, steal gold from somebody or take a bribe or something like that. So he wasn't exactly clean. But then when he started getting his power, he started getting tempted to do more things and go against his nature. And I kind of wanted to role play that.
Yeah. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. It definitely made, because, I was playing in that same Waterdeep campaign with you, and it made the RP even between characters very interesting, because like I was playing that roguish character, and at first I was like, oh, City Watch, but then like, oh, he's also like for himself. So it was a weird understanding like between our characters and that for like what's good and what's a little bit too far past the line. And
so for this character, I picked an Aasimar, and it was the fallen Aasimar, so that he had like the necrotic wings and all that. And the story was, he was basically left for adoption in, the city of Waterdeep, which is a huge city. He was adopted by a watchman, a city watchman. He got into some trouble when he was like 17, ended up doing some time, ended up doing a little service in the city soldiers, like, defending the city. Mm-hmm. And then kind of went into the watch, but never really knew like his origin and things like that. And that was kind of going to be something that was going to play into the patron.
Yeah, which makes sense. You get that, you have that background for where your patron ties in. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's, I think, a big factor for that Warlock is, you can kind of pick any patron, but like don't pick it so crazy that it doesn't tie in with you. I would suggest at least.
Yeah.
For RP, you definitely need something that you can work with. That's been one of my hesitations when it came to playing a Warlock. Is there is a big, there's a big commitment, because you are saying, hey, I want this thing to have a say, not necessarily in what I do, but have a say in the RP that I play.
Yeah.
And then that changes the way that you do things. So that's always been like I don't know if I want to give that up just yet.
Yeah.
Well, and it could really be too a burden or a boon to your party as well. Like if you're in a situation where you're traveling with a group and you have been, and then you take on this, you take on a class of Warlock, and you start dealing with this patron, this otherworldly being, that creature, that entity, might not have the same goals as your teammates, and you might be forced to do things that would, that maybe normally you would never do. And that was kind of the route I was going to go. The only thing that I could really suggest for the Warlock, just from my personal experience as far as role playing goes, my dungeon master was he was newly running. It was like his first time running a game. He was running a pre-made. He never dealt with a Warlock before. He had asked me for some assistance in coming up with the patron. So I did, and I kind of had a little bit of some growing pains with the class, because you do have a lot of options, especially when you get into the invocations. So you can really kind of build you can build different combinations of Warlocks and get a lot of different effects. So I had a little problem with that, but I ended up writing a concept for the patron, and I wrote a little bit of the mythology, and I sent it to the dungeon master, and he used it. But it just kind of got to a point for myself where it's I had kind of I don't know, I was writing my own story, and not so much writing my own story through my role play, but actually writing my story.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of disparaging, just to, I was kind of well, I already had it all figured out. There wasn't a mystery. Yeah. And so that was one thing that I would suggest. You definitely have to work closely with your dungeon master if you're going to get into a Warlock class. I think probably even more so than the cleric or the paladin classes. Mm-hmm. And the reason I say that is because, unlike in older editions of Dungeons and Dragons, in 5th edition, you really don't get your powers ripped away from you every 5 seconds. If you're a Warlock, that's not the case.
Yeah.
You disobey, you just shut your power off.
Yep. Yeah, which makes it difficult, for as you were saying, Frank, you lose that ability to kind of as a player decide, I don't want to do that. And I think it's a fine line that your DM, has to walk. Because they can force you to do something really bad, but if your player doesn't really want to do that, now you're just making it a bad time for your player, and nobody's going to enjoy it.
Yeah.
Right.
And nobody wins, if somebody's not happy at the table. So.
Oh yeah, exactly.
And I think one of the things that you can, an example of that, of what you guys are just talking about, is probably you could look at what's happening in the second season here of Critical Role with the Warlock character Ford.
Not affiliated with Tabletop Totality.
Right. Who made we're just fans. Who made a pact and then decided to opt out of that pact, and had a period of time where there was no power, ended up multi-classing into a paladin class, was given back their power, in addition to some paladin abilities. So that was a pretty cool workaround, where the character still had a decision, and the character made the decision to not serve this entity any further.
Yeah.
and then had like a period of trial before finding a new source of power.
And I think that's a cool aspect that, you know, that's why the DM and the player need to work together on figuring, especially for a warlock class, as you said. You know, it has that old vibe. Hey, you didn't do what I said, so why am I giving you power?
Yeah, it's important. It's important to be talking about that stuff with your DM, and it's also important to sort of know why, like, what it is that you're doing with the warlock. Because when I played as a warlock, I've only done it once in 5th edition. He was a warlock that was very reluctant to use his power because it came from this sort of evil entity, and it was a pact that he didn't really form by choice. It was one that he was sort of born into, and because of that, there were things that he had done that he couldn't remember. Like he lost like almost a decade of his life and didn't know what he had done during that time because of the things that the patron had made him do.
Gotcha.
And because of that, he never used magic. He never used his powers because he was afraid that if he used them, then that patron would come calling again and basically make him lose more time and make him do things that he didn't understand or know what he had done. Yeah. So that's kind of another aspect of the warlock is like if your character is in that kind of a relationship with their patron, like how do you work around that? And I didn't really get far enough in there to multiclass into something else or figure out a way around it or anything like that. So he was just kind of this guy that just kind of hung around and just was all martial, but because he's a warlock, like they don't really have that much martial capability. They're all about like the spell casting and stuff. And so he didn't use spells. I think he may have used one spell the entire time that I played as him.
It was once or twice. I remember that. Yeah.
Because he was so reluctant because of the patron. But again, going back to what Cody was saying before, like the patron that he and I came up with, we worked on it together. And that patron is still a problem in current campaigns. So it was interesting coming up with that, because I kind of came up with this idea of like it was this being that wanted to be released from some kind of prison, and if it appeared it would destroy the world and that sort of stuff, and he didn't want that to happen, and all this stuff like that. And Cody and I worked on that a lot, and like Cody said, like he kept a lot of the mystery. I didn't even know the patron's name the entire time that we were playing, and only now that I'm hearing about and involved with a campaign that is a extension of that former campaign do I know who that being is and just how powerful they are. And man, I shouldn't have been messing with that. really glad I didn't mess with that, because wow, that thing is strong and scary, and I don't want to deal with it at all.
Now, I would like to actually talk about how, especially with like your play style, Steve, you very much, you dig deep into the campaign. You're like, all right, what's an aspect of the campaign that's not being utilized yet? You ask your DM, they tell you, especially you and Cody currently, and he tells you about a thing, and then all of a sudden you're nose deep in it. And especially with this specific case of a patron, like you were dealing with that like on a turn-to-turn basis, where in other campaigns a warlock and a DM may not have so much, that patron may not be trying to guide all the decisions so much because of a different play style. But definitely with your play style and the way that you were running that character in that campaign, you definitely wanted that, Am I correct in that assumption?
What are you saying that I wanted?
That you wanted to have that kind of interaction with the patron.
The character. I wanted the character to not want anything to do with the patron, because when he found out what that patron was, he was terrified and didn't want anything to do with it. And speaking from experience, like I didn't really. That was the first, maybe the second time I've ever played a warlock. I can't remember. I think the one time I played 4th edition years and years ago, I think I made a warlock.
Yes,
and
you did.
It was on a much lesser scale, because we had no idea what we were doing, because this Warlock first came out, and I was just like, oh, cool, a spellcaster. I'll do a spellcaster. Frank can be a big brute, and we'll just go in and mess with people, and it was fun. But
that was a good night.
But now it's sort of more in depth, and like the idea of what patrons are is more clear, and because of that, they're more involved with the story. And so when playing a warlock that doesn't want anything to do with their patron, it stops being as fun because you're kind of hiding your ability, and you're not really realizing your full potential at all because you're not doing anything related to the class. But that's just because of me being more like about the role play than about the numbers, and being like, this character would not want to use their potential because their potential could cause a lot of damage down the road. And because of that, it kind of made it a little bit less fun to play that character, just because they didn't really utilize a lot of their abilities, and that kind of made it suffer a little bit. But it was so, it's
like, even just hearing you talk about that character brings up a really cool point about the patrons. Like, everybody always thinks about like a warlock's patron as something that's like a little bit more like evil in nature, I feel, or something that's just greedy for power.
I was just thinking that they don't always have to be nefarious,
No, like you have this whole aspect of things that you can choose from to be a patron if you're talking to your DM. So like, and in a way, is it beneficial to that patron if they constantly make it seem like they're big, bad, and evil, to have somebody who has this boon, you know what I mean, not using its power. So it also, it's a lot of give and take, not just from the patron giving and taking power, but also from the player giving the patron its power, because without that warlock, that patron doesn't have another champion, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a really good point to make, like, on the dynamic, like when it comes to like the nature of a deity or the patron and the follower, because like Neil was saying before, like, it doesn't always have to be like a big bad evil guy is your patron, for your campaign. You have to realize that you are given power by this being, and this being, there has to be a reason why.
Yeah.
Because if this being had the power to just annihilate you, and that's what it wanted to do, why wouldn't it just do that? But instead, this entity is giving you magical boons. So the relationship in itself is more dynamic. Like, yes, you would be subservient, I guess, to this more powerful presence, but obviously they need you, or they see something in you, because why else would they part with any of their power?
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's also a really cool aspect as a DM. You can delve into it, or even as a player, you know what I mean? Like, if you end up becoming a strong warlock, is that power because of you becoming more powerful? Is it because your patron's becoming more powerful, or is it a little bit of both? You know what I mean? And then do you get a leg to stand on, in a way? You know what I mean?
So for my patron for that campaign, I came up with this patron. She was like she was an elder goddess. Her name was Callus, and she was a deity of like the night sky, the stars. So wizards and astronomers and things worshipped her. But she also had there was kind of like a weaving type thing going on. Where I thought of like the strands of fate, and like time. So what I said was that she would take like the spirits of the dead, and she would weave them into the stars, like into the night sky. Okay. And that was like her thing. So she's like, I wrote her that so that she was like very ancient. So she was no longer a subject of being worshipped. She's no longer, a deity at this point. She's in my mind, she's fallen down into being a patron, where she's more like a demigod or something like that. And she took interest in my character simply because my character had some sort of celestial lineage. Because I wrote Callus to be like in her true form, to be like this great big like space spider that basically looks for champions, creates these warlock champions, and raises them up to a point of like being demigods themselves, and then she consumes them so that she can continue to live.
Oh, okay.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, so I wrote that whole. So that's kind of where I said like the mystery wasn't really there for me, because I was like, eventually my character is gonna have problems.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
So it was a cool idea, but it was more like, I guess it probably would have been cooler for me to have been the DM and to run that
on a warlock.
Yeah.
Which that lore will be up on our website. Cody's gonna get that prepped for us, so you can use it in your own campaign.
Exactly.
I guess I have more work to do.
The work never ends.
No.
So, I've never played one, and I've always been a little hesitant, as we've talked about in the past, just because of, I feel just the play style that I tend to do is very free, and I just kind of like go with it, and my characters kind of tell me what's going on, where in this case it's a bit different from my play style. Like I mean, I'm sure you guys would agree, but I'm looking at some of the stuff that they can do, just the invocations in general, and I never really took the time. I'm always like, oh yeah, Eldritch Blast, but like right here, let's see, Eyes of the Runekeeper. You read all writing.
Yeah. You just know it.
There's a couple of people in this chat that would really benefit from being able to read all writing.
You can
It's a real hindrance when if you find a language, and it's definitely important that you read it first, and you just can't.
Yeah.
You can cast...
I don't know what sort of DM makes like their own like languages and ciphers and things, but that's just
wild.
And I mean, there's ways around it, obviously. There's some kind of a magical thing preventing you from reading it. You need to go further, because obviously sometimes you do want mystery in there. So
well, I actually did the same thing in the campaign that I'm currently running, because a wizard would be able to cast like comprehend language or whatever, but I decided that this language was completely alien and foreign to this world, so it wouldn't match any sort of written language. So there's no real
way to comprehend it.
There's no cipher for anybody to go off of to try to translate it. So that was my workaround for that.
Yeah.
Here's another one. Armor of Shadows. You cast mage armor on yourself at will without expending a spell slot or material components. Like, what? Yeah. Okay, done. Like, there you go.
Yeah, and that's to kind of weigh out the whole like you only have like 2 or 3 spell slots as a warlock. Yeah. Which a lot of people will get afraid of, but you get 2 or 3 spell slots as a warlock. You can regain them at a short rest.
Yeah, I think that's one of the really cool things, because a lot of stuff in 5e is long rest, right?
Yeah.
And your warlocks are not that way. They're very much, I'm going to use everything here. All right, let me just like take an hour cat nap and I'll be right back and give you the same exact stuff.
This one's actually my favorite that I've read so far. You cast Speak with Animals at will without expending a spell slot. That is beast speech. Dude, just be hanging out talking to your pig or whatever, like, yeah, I know that guy's crazy, and people are like, what the fuck, what's going on, why is he talking to a pig?
The Warlock too, like, it also reminds me of like, has anybody here seen the 90s version of Dracula with Gary Oldman and Anthony Hopkins? It's a fantastic movie, probably one of my favorite, my favorite vampire movie of all time. But there's kind of like in that whole Dracula thing, there's the character of, I think it's Renfield, who becomes kind of like a servant to Dracula. And Renfrew gets like, he does get like certain abilities that sets him apart from a normal human. But he also suffers for it. But when he's in this transformation, like when he's like kind of like being like the warlock for the Dracula, for the vampire, he's like eating, he's eating bugs, and he's like doing all these like things that, you know, are like he never would have done in his normal life, you know?
Yeah.
So you can add that element into your role play too, where like my warlock had like every time like you'd be writing something, like spiders would come out of the pages, or
call for real, or just he would see spiders come out of the page.
He would see spiders.
Oh, all right, that would be pretty awesome either way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of them are like, they're like, as much as the warlock technically has spells, it's almost like it's not a spellcaster, you know what I mean? In the sense, you're not going to be able to shoot a fireball down there, you know what I mean, or magic, but they're different, you know what I mean? And in the explanation of them, it allows for just a lot of awesome explanations of the spell itself being cast, you know what I mean? Yeah. You get a lot of flavor that way.
And you know, we should point out too is that, you know, the big thing that separates the warlock from some of these other casters is that, you know, like a wizard or a sorcerer, they want to pay attention to the level of spells that they're casting, especially a sorcerer, because you're sitting there trying to expend spell points.
Yeah, you know, so recoup them. Yeah. Right.
The warlock, basically everything you cast is always cast at its highest level.
Yeah.
That you're capable of. That the character's capable of. So that's like, I kind of like your description of how you said before, Neil, is that the warlock's like, hey, you know, for this battle, I'm going to go all out.
Yeah.
I got 2 slots, and they're both 5th level spells, so I'm going to do something cool with those. And then I'm probably going to cast Eldritch Blast or use my weapon or whatever. You know, try to survive with my cantrips. But then in an hour, I'm good to go again.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so let's actually go over that. So spell slot wise, up to 10th level, they have 2. And then after that, you go into 3. And then once you hit 17, you get 4. But a nice adage to all that is Mystic Arcanum. And that there's 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th. And you get to pick one of the spells on that list for that spell level. And you can cast that once a day or per long rest.
Yeah.
And that's cool too, because it does give you a little bit more versatility. And, you know, for certain people, like just being able to do cantrips is more than enough.
Yeah.
And this other stuff is just icing, you know?
Yeah. And I know even for myself, like I picked a Hexblade, and I really, maybe it was my inexperience because it was only my first time playing a Warlock, but a Hexblade would be a little bit more of a martial caster.
Yeah.
But I was strongly considering like ditching my ability score increase and going for a feat like Magic Initiate or something to try to get a couple more spells, or you know, gain a few more cantrips. And I also had a big toss up with the whether you picked like the Book of Shadows, I think it is, that gives you extra spells, or the Tome of Shadows, I think it is, that gives you extra spells, or like for your evocations. Because I think I ended up picking something that allowed me to like get like a +1 to my attack or something instead. But I remember like trying to like every time I leveled up, I was trying to, you know, get the best out of the build.
Oh yeah, I remember talking to you all the time when you were low. Like as soon as we hit a level up, there was like, I could go this way, or this way, or this way. I was like, man, you got a lot of choices.
Yeah, and I think that maybe that's you know, that's kind of the double-edged sword for the Warlock, is that you can build it in a lot of cool different ways, but then there's also a lot of like, you could pick something thinking it sounds cool and then you never use it, you know, and that's like one of your main things that now you've kind of wasted.
Yeah, the feat to ritual cast is cool too, because then that kind of falls into the warlock where it's like, well, we can't just do this. Like, we need to get some things ready. It's going to take us time. I could do it. I could do a bunch of these things, but we need to prepare. And I feel definitely for the role play side, especially if you wanted to do like a somewhat more of a limited magic style campaign.
Yeah,
I feel like yeah. So then you know, okay, I can do a few things, and yeah, I can Eldritch Blast you till cows come home. But the reality is, to do some of that good magic, you either have to have a ritual, or you have to be a little bit higher of a level, and your connection has to be stronger, and you're going to be doing a lot of RP, whether it be with you and your patron, or just you and the world. Spouting the gospel.
Yeah. No, it definitely, like, and it'd be really cool in a campaign setting where you're like, oh, there is no spellcasters, but like you have warlocks and stuff like that here, they're worshiping something that's giving them just enough power.
or the spellcasters.
Yeah, and I think that would be cool. That would be cool for a setting for like your Call of Cthulhu or your Conan, where it's like there are not a huge amount of casters, but those who are casters are getting their power from probably less than reputable patrons.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. Describing a world with not a lot of magic, my thoughts instantly went to Lovecraft and Conan, where it's like, these people have these magical powers, but they are coming from these dark elder gods that are asking a lot of these people.
Yeah, there's a lot of costs for the price is pretty heavy, Yeah,
you might have your 1 or 2 Merlin type figures that, like, oh, that's an actual wizard or that's a sorcerer, but everybody else is pulling it from somewhere else, and they're coming for you.
Or maybe you even had this background where there was like these 7 wizards, you know what I mean? They got this ultimate power and pretty much just rose to godhood, but killed all other wizards and their research on it. So now you have
the patron.
Yeah, and then now you the only way they're bestowing to warlocks.
And there's just a war, and the warlocks have to fight through the war to kill the other wizard or sorcerer. So this way, theirs is the only one left. And
exactly.
Kind of cool. Yeah, it'll be a fun little.
Be interesting.
Yeah. And I do like some of the things where it's just like back to those invocations. Whisper of the Grave. You can cast Speak with Dead at will without expending a spell slot. Like, you just have some innate ability. Like, I'm just gonna talk to the skeleton over here. What's up, bro?
Yeah, that was something that my character picked, because my character, his department for the City Watch was homicide. So I kind of thought, like, that's total flavor right there, to be able to talk to the victim in your case, and ask it important questions. So I was trying to build up like where my character was going to become like a pretty awesome inspector. But people would obviously start suspecting
foul play, or how did you get that much information? You must have killed it.
Right. Like, there would be like some supernatural element to my character, and there'd be suspicions raised, and which I kind of thought that would just add to the whole idea.
So, I mean, honestly, I would like to play one of these one day.
No one wants to play with you, so
anybody at home that wants to roll some dice, you let me know.
It's gonna be a like the Warlock. I think it's definitely one of those classes that you have to be in the right mood with, and it's like how the Cleric and the Paladin were in 3.5. You know what I mean? Like, you had to kind of follow what your character was, you know what I mean? If they were good, they had to do good things, otherwise they lost their spells. And I think that's like the throwback to it, is this Warlock and how they do it.
Yeah, the Warlock is definitely supposed to be a throwback to that kind of stuff, and the Monk too, which never made sense. But always be lawful, or else you lose all your abilities. Why? Okay. But yeah, it's definitely supposed to harken back to 3.5's idea of how gods dealt with their followers, and now the gods are so powerful that they don't need to worry about the alignments of their followers or what their followers do, or so they can just do whatever. But warlocks have these lesser powered beings that are way more focused on, what are you doing with my power, and how am I going to have you repay me for?
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, and I think that dynamic needs to be highlighted a little bit, because in my opinion anyway, like in my campaigns that I'm running, I imagine that a deity, would probably have, could have potentially millions of followers, of worshipers. Is that deity able to split its time amongst all of those followers equally? No. And I think that's why you get like clerics and paladins and stuff like that. But they're a select few of the total mass of worshipers. I feel like for a patron, has such limited powers that the patron might only have one or two warlocks, that they're basically relying on you to be their connection or their utensil in this world, certainly if you're playing something like an Archfey or like the warlock suggests that you're dealing with some sort of outside force to your world, so you getting power from this entity from this other place, like you're that tether to this world,
right.
But yeah, I agree with what you're saying, Steve, that I think the patron would be much more involved in your day to day,
Yeah,
I almost feel like it's reverse of the cleric in some ways, where it's usually you're praying to the god as a cleric, where in this case it's like, knock knock, hey, what's up, bud? What do you have going on today? Oh, you're doing that? Hey, go over there and grab this magic thing and do that.
The relationship,
I'm gonna need you to go and steal this thing, or I'm gonna shut your powers off.
Yeah, the relationship between a cleric or between a warlock and their patron is very much more give and take than any other. Because the other ones is like, oh, just pray to me, and it's like, okay,
that's good enough.
Now, I would firmly suggest to anybody that's DMing it is don't always just go to, well, I'm going to turn your powers off if you don't do it, because then that becomes you arresting the character.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, within reason,
Yeah, it's the fable line of, oh, I don't want to do that, and you say that to your patron, you go, all right, well, you'll pay for it at some point.
That's the thing. Definitely punish your warlock if they're not doing what the patron wants them to do, but that doesn't necessarily mean you take the powers away.
Yeah, every 5 seconds. Well, you don't have powers now.
Well, one of the things that I would suggest doing really is I'd sit there and I'd throw another warlock at him.
Yeah,
and I'd be like, you are no longer my favorite, and you need to prove, you need to prove yourself.
Yeah, whatever two of you warlocks win this battle or is now my champion, and if you win the battle, then you've won my favor back.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Right.
Or curse them like, oh, you have boils today. That's last week.
Give them pestilence.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I was going to even say, like, if it's like, okay, well, I don't need to take your magic away, but that's not the only thing I can take from you. We made this deep contract, this deep pact. I can take your eyesight away until you do this for me, or I can take away like the ability to use your left arm until you.
Right, and I think obviously I think people will probably there's probably people that are listening to this that are like, oh shit, like the dungeon master could really like Frank was saying, arrest or corral a character, because you could effectively turn off all the things that make the character different from the other classes. And the warlock, I think the warlock without its magic is not a good enough fighter to match up to any of the other martial classes.
No.
I can tell you from experience, no, they are not.
So even the Hexblades, but they get bonuses from their patron. I don't know. Maybe if you have a dungeon master that frequently railroads the crap out of your party and doesn't really collaborate with you, I could see this being maybe a class you'd like to avoid.
as
Yeah.
much as possible. in that
as
case,
much as
yeah.
possible. Yeah, and I think that's our perspective is we've all played together for a long time now, and you'll
We've
hear us
played
talk.
every style.
Yeah.
And you'll hear us talk about we made a ton of mistakes on things, and we played things that didn't last or didn't work, or we tried to make our own versions of games. We've done a lot, but I think like now where we are now, like we always try to focus on role play that is engaging and fun. So a lot of times we go more for the story than the all the mechanics of it. So I would say for my suggestion is if you're going to play a warlock, you need to have a pretty good collaborative relationship, not only with your teammates, but also with your DM.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you bring up a really good point there is, your teammates, as much as you don't want a meta game, like there has to be an understanding like, hey, there's, my character is going to have things that it has to do that it's not going to like, it's not personal,
Especially, let's say like, all right, every so often as the DM, I'm going to ask you to do something as your patron. The rest of the time, I might, bicker in your ear as the patron, but I'm not going to demand like, oh, go kill that mayor with the 15 guards all by yourself because I'm a jerk. No, more of like, all right, just you see a wizard or somebody use this magical item. All right, you need to get that, and you need to destroy it.
Yeah,
because that my enemy made that or something like that.
Yeah, and it could even be that the patron isn't really involved with what you do for how you act like them. To go back to Critical Role again, the character Jester, who is a cleric of the Traveler, was originally supposed to be a warlock of the Traveler, and the way that Laura Bailey plays that character is, I feel, very much like how a warlock would act, where she just plays little pranks and does little goofy stuff all the time that is sort of like in line with what she believes that her patron would want if she had been a warlock. And the Traveler doesn't ask her to do those things. She just does them because they fall in line with like the sort of things that like she like defaces religious artifacts and books and things just as a goof because she thinks that it's what the Traveler would want her to do.
Chaos. That
feels very much warlock-y to me. But it's not 100%. Really something asked of her. It's just something that she does just because that is something that she feels is like paying tribute to her patron, which is kind of part of what the idea of what the warlocks what you're supposed to be doing is you're supposed to be paying tribute to this thing in a much more meaningful way than just praying to it. You're supposed to be showing it absolute devotion through your actions, and if you're not doing that, then that's when the DM should step in, or if the patron has very specific ways for you to pay tribute to it, like you have to commit a sacrifice or something, and it has a very specific thing or target that it wants you to sacrifice. That's when the patron should really become very involved in explaining to you what you need to do. Yeah. But like if you're playing a warlock that is, that understands your patron more or less, or believes that they understand them and what they're about, then the warlock could just potentially just be doing things in the world that are sort of that tribute without really needing to be told what to do.
Yeah, so, I feel, to bounce off what you just said, like especially if somebody isn't that strong of a role player, kind of doing it warlock light, which is like the cleric style, or if you just don't want to be like, you just don't want to have to do all of that stuff and trudge through the mud. Like, that's a really great way that you just laid it out, Steve, to actually DM and play it. Like, all right, once a month you have to do a thing. You can sacrifice it, or once in a while I might just ask you, hey, you don't have to sacrifice this thing that's really hard to get this month if you do this little job for me. Otherwise, you need to sacrifice the thing.
Yeah. Well, it's the whole idea of, why did the patron pick this person? They're clearly got to have some in-line, thought to be like, hey, this person's going to be a good champion. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and sometimes I think it's funny, or not funny, but, well, I get enjoyment out of it, I guess. But, something that I would do would, I would treat maybe the patron relationship with the warlock maybe a little bit like, mafia terms, where it'd be like, hey, I really bailed you out back there. You owe me. You owe me at some point, and I'm kind of doing that with Brugnarsh in our game. Where his, a deity of sorts intervened on his behalf and saved his character's life, and basically said, you are going to be called upon at some point, and if you don't answer the call and do what I need you to do, then I'm going to take that life back. So that's something that you could kind of do with the warlock, that I would do, or be like, you basically have gotten in debt with this thing.
Yeah. That would be a cool way too. Like, let's just say, like, for a while in game, you just give him an extra level, and it's a warlock. Like, you just have it for now. You can get your way out of it, or you can end up keeping it, but for X amount of time, you have this thing you have to.
Yeah. So, like, one of the things I did is, like, instead of like giving him like just like a full like level in warlock, it's like one of the things I did was like he got like extra damage for his weapon. He got like a boost to his intelligence. He got like the keen mind feat so that he could like he's a little bit smarter, which falls in line to the aspects of this deity, of this entity, who's more about strategy. So, those are things that obviously if he fell out of favor, he would no longer have.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like Warlock, like Warlock Light, where it's, I didn't give you a level, but I'm giving you sort of some warlock traits.
It's how you would have done it if you didn't have a warlock class. You know what I mean? If there wasn't that class, you'd just be gifted a boon, and then if you did well, here's a magical item now that gives you this aspect. You know what I mean? Like it's
right.
Where the warlock's just, hey, I'm gonna give you all this stuff, and we're gonna really create my name. It's the difference of doing a quest for a deity or patron or whatever one time, or living your life solely for that deity or patron.
And that's kind of we were talking about how like the relationships can kind of be pretty heavy-handed, where the patron can kind of just be like, you serve me now or there's trouble. In the case for like the warlock that I was playing with, that patron with Callus, her boons were going to be seemingly unending. To the point where, I even had it written where she was kind of like, almost like seduce the character or her victim to the point where, she would make them believe that they had her complete favor. And she would just elevate them to such a status, like to such a point of like near divinity, and then she would drain all that power from them to further her own existence. So that's kind of like enjoy the good times while they're good, because when the patron finally rears its head, it's time to pay up. So that's kind of what I meant about that whole debt thing, where you fall into debt with the patron.
Yeah, I feel too many people might go the opposite, where it's like, oh, well, every week you gotta do it. It's like, come on, like, cut me a break here. I'm trying to play the game. Like, once in a blue moon, when you ask me to do that big favor, like, you gotta leave me alone for a while now.
Yeah, and so like one of the things too is that I hate to keep bringing this up, but like just the way it was played in the game that I played, it was, if my patron was trying to tell me something, I might see like a little trail of like little tiny baby spiders, like leading to a certain book on a shelf or something, and I didn't have to go and investigate that. I could have made the decision to ignore it, but that was at least like, that was at least a little bit of having like the patron's hand like in the role play, where it was like, hey, you might want to look into this. It could be,
who's to say it's the patron coming in whispering in your ear saying, hey, you need to do that, or it could be just, hey, you see a glint of a interesting looking spider web in that corner.
Right.
And that's it. And that was your perception check or your investigation check, you know, and that's not the patron saying, hey, go over there and do this. It's, you know, here's a little thing.
And the other, the one of the last things I'd like to bring up for myself, as far as the patron's concerned, you know, the warlock kind of implies that your patron is somewhat otherworldly. It's not of your world, so really you can get creative with how, you know, like things can get lost in translation. And part of like a suggestion I would have would be like, you know, let's say your character, you know, the character is a hexblade warlock with a longsword. That's like their family heirloom is this longsword. Well, that weapon soon becomes their pact weapon, you know, and it gets a boost and everything. Maybe the patron could point the player or the character into a direction of like a more powerful sword, like a more powerful relic or whatever. So the character can learn about this sword and say, oh, you know, I want to go get that sword. So they go after it and they get this sword. Well, that falls in line with what the patron wants, but maybe didn't necessarily communicate.
Yeah.
So you could make it so it's like, yeah, like you get the cool sword and you think that's what this was all about. But really, it was you killed the monster that was protecting something that's keeping me sealed away or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, you don't have to make every intention known. You know, that's part of the whole thing with like the Lovecraftian Cthulhu stuff, was that like these entities are supposed to be so out of our own comprehension that the mere mention of them can start to mess with your mind and with your insanity, or, you know, with your sanity. So you really don't have to you don't have to translate everything. You don't have to spell everything out for the player, and that can add a little bit more of the mystery, but also kind of lighten up on the whole, like, you have to do this for me.
Yeah.
You know, you can kind of entice them into the situation, but not reveal all the pieces on the board.
Yeah.
And that would be my strategy as a dungeon master. That's how I would do it.
Yeah, and it doesn't even necessarily mean like, oh, now I'm free. After 1,000 years, I'm free. It could just be like, oh yeah, that was an enemy. Like,
yeah.
When I was growing up, he, you know, I fought it, and it dealt damage to me or this, that. We had to.
It gave me a little scar.
Yeah, and I never went back to fight it, but you're in that area. I'm sorry, Steve, I cut you out. What?
I was gonna say, like, yeah, it's killed 3 of my warlocks before. I hate it. Kill it.
Just send it.
Well, then there could also just be situations where, you know, maybe there isn't a clear objective, where something is just like the warlock's just being tested. And maybe there's no dire consequence at the moment. You know, like, you can build a lot of suspense by simply having the patron not interact with the warlock.
Yeah.
Like, point them in a direction. The warlock goes through the whole scenario, like whatever it is, like a miniature temple or a dungeon that you've created. The warlock gets to the end and does the thing, whatever it is, and then there's no contact from the patron for like a week
or a month.
Yeah.
Like, that player would
you still have your powers, but you're just like, what's going on?
But wouldn't that player be I would be freaking out.
Oh yeah.
You know, so there's a lot of fun you can have with the warlock, but I think maybe it's not for everyone. And I think certainly you need to care a little bit more about role play and less about, you know, combat. You know, I don't think you're ever going to be a frontliner as a warlock, but you could certainly serve as the party leader, the party face. You can kind of pass off as like a hedge wizard.
Yeah.
You know, like you do have utility, but maybe not, you know, all the pluses.
Right. Another cool thing to potentially do would be like, especially if you're working with time or just like the long-term plan, like, oh yeah, my plan is in 3,000 years I'm going to rule this dimension. Like, you're just a piece of it. So what I need you to do is, and you don't even know, like, it's just like you meet this guy and you're talking to him, and then you eventually meet somebody else, and the patron's like, hey, I want you to go back 3 towns, get Bob, bring Bob to Diane, introduce them.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
okay, Bob's just a farmer. So
Yep.
is Diane.
But
Yep,
but
do it.
Bob's like 27th grandchild will be some important figure or whatever.
Yeah,
Potentially, yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, or the mixture of their lines or whatever potentially could lead to
Something.
one of six, outcomes. And
Well,
That'd be
and
pretty cool.
one of the things that was kind of cool, like with Steve's Warlock, is that he had this backstory.
Cody, I can't really hear you. Get closer to your mic, bud.
Oh, sorry. So one of the things was like what Steve had with his Warlock was that his family kind of had this like infernal pact where the tiefling offspring from this family were basically being used as vessels and sacrifices for this cult.
Yeah.
So you could even do something similar like that, where it's like, the complexity of your patrons, like, oh yeah, well, in 26 years, you just made an Asimar for me to then sacrifice in 26 years. You don't realize it now, but you introducing these people did that for me.
Yeah.
Thanks for the power, bud. We'll keep
Yeah,
going.
thanks.
Yeah, that would be an interesting way of doing like a patron relationship where it's just like you go around, you do your thing, you play your thing. Once in a while, it's like, hey, I need you to introduce those two people. I need you to bring this to that guy. And it's just weird stuff like, okay, you want me to bring this book of, dungeons, like of dungeon creatures to Steve, and what's he going to do with it? Just do it. All right, whatever.
Yeah.
And then eventually you start seeing these seeds get planted where it's just like, all right, like,
Or you don't.
or you
You
don't.
The seeds are there, but you're like, this seems like a plan, but I do not understand where this is going. I cannot understand. It's like, yeah, well, give it 1,000 years, and then you'll see what's going on.
It's more than your mortal life can understand.
Oh, well, 4,000 years ago, I did all these things, and that actually led to this guy, and now you can take this guy and bring him here, and then he can plant his farm here, and then in 4,000 years, his family will be there, and then we're good to go. Like,
Yeah.
that's how you make a king, baby.
That was a winner line right there.
That's how you make a king, baby.
Yeah. That's how you make a king, baby. So one of the things too is that I had already kind of described the relationship that my Warlock had with the patron, and one of the things I was thinking about having be a consequence of this was going to be that my character, if they paid enough attention, would realize that all of these relics and things that they were going after coincided with heroes or things like throughout time, that was basically the victims of the patron. These are all the former warlocks that had risen up to these near impossible levels of power and then had their power snuffed out. So it would be up for my character to maybe follow that loose thread and maybe come up to that conclusion. And the thing that would be working against my character would be the temptation of all this power. Where they wouldn't really be thinking about the consequences of what they were doing or where they were getting this power from.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we just delved into a lot of different aspects about this world.
Yeah, we did.
This is more of a patron episode than it is a warlock.
But that's kind of what it is, though. Like that's the class. It involves a lot of that.
Wow. Well, I guess we should wrap this one up, huh?
Yeah, probably. We probably rambled for enough.
Yeah, about an hour. A little under an hour, I think.
All right,
guys. Well, that was actually a really good talk, and now I want to roll up a warlock.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, no,
cool.
it'll be a time.
Yeah. Any final thoughts?
Not today, Warlock, but
Today.
Yeah.
but someday.
But it was today. It was today, though, because we did it
Today's
today.
the only
Sure.
day,
So today, Warlock,
but only today.
this one's for you.
All right, everybody out there in podcast land, you know the deal. We'll see you next time.
Adios.
Peace.
Hopefully, when you're listening to this in 5,000 years, it will cause some kind of very good thing for all of us.
That's how you make a king, baby.
Greetings, mortals! Oh wow, that peaks it really bad, huh? Greetings, mortals! It is I, Wrathguard of the Wicked, here to steal all your souls for the great snake god Vruchet. But before you are sacrificed to his malevolent hunger, go and check out TabletopTotality.com, where you can find all sorts of creatures, items, articles, and more, along with links to our YouTube, social media, and our Patreon, where you can support us for as little as $1 a month. That's less than my friends and I spend on sacrificial pig's blood for our rituals.
Daniel, where are you?
Mom, I'm recording! Leave me alone!
It's time for dinner. I made your favorite, smashed peas.
Oh boy. Go check out TabletopTotality.com.